What happens when a late-night host known for playful chaos invites a prince who's forgotten how to laugh? On Watch. What happens live with Andy Cohen? The audience expected cheeky games, light gossip, maybe a royal story or two. Instead, they watched something else unfold. A conversation that twisted into a contest of ego, a host trying to keep his show afloat, and a guest who seemed determined to sink it on live television. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was the night Andy Cohen told a prince to leave his stage. Neon signs glowed against a wall of books, liquor bottles, and tiny oddities picked up from a decade of celebrity visits. A giant red AC marquee pulsed softly beneath the main screen, which flashed the familiar logo. Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen. To the right, a fully decorated Christmas tree shimmered in multicolored lights, its ornaments catching the studio glare like tiny planets. The audience sat close, almost on top of the set, cocktails in hand, already laughing at the pre-show warm-up. The carpet, striped in bright red, blue, yellow, and orange, looked like someone had spilled a rainbow and decided to leave it that way. It was intimate, messy, and unmistakably Andy. Andy Cohen sat in his usual slate blue chair, a stack of question cards in one hand, a mischievous half-smile tugging at his mouth. Tonight, though, even he seemed a touch more focused, more measured. His gray suit was sharp, his posture slightly straighter than usual. This guest wasn't a real housewife or a Bravo superfan. This was a royal, well, former royal, sort of, depending on which headline you believed. Opposite him, in the matching chair, sat Prince Harry. He wore a dark navy suit and an open-collar white shirt. No tie, no fuss. One ankle rested over his knee, hands loosely clasped, but everything about his body language was coiled and tight. His jaw worked slightly as he looked around the studio, taking in the neon Empire State Building print, the framed photos, the cheeky memorabilia. He looked unimpressed. Andy turned toward the camera, smile widening. "Welcome back, you guys. Tonight is... Wow. We have had a lot of guests in this clubhouse, but I don't think we've ever had someone whose grandmother had her face on money." Laughter rolled through the audience. "Please welcome Prince Harry." The crowd applauded, some whooping, some clearly in disbelief that he was really there. Harry gave a small, stiff smile, lifting a hand in a half wave. It didn't quite reach his eyes. "Harry, thank you for being here," Andy began, voice warm, respectful. Harry nodded once. "Well, you know," he said, tone already edged with something cool. "I thought it was time someone brought a bit of class to late-night television." Some people laughed, thinking it was a joke. Andy's brows flickered up for a split second. He let out a light chuckle. "I'll take that as a compliment, I think," he said. "We do have cocktails and a Christmas tree, so we're halfway there." The studio chuckled again, but there was a different undercurrent now. Curiosity pricked with the faintest hint of tension. Andy glanced at his cards. "So, Harry, you've done some big serious interviews lately. Netflix, Oprah, these, global sit-downs. What made you say yes to this madhouse?" Harry shifted in his seat, stretching his shoulders. "Because, Andy, people think they know me from those interviews," he said. "I thought it might be interesting to remind them I'm not just a soundbite in someone else's serious documentary. And instead, you're a soundbite on my messy little Bravo show," Andy said, grinning. Harry smirked. "At least here, the expectations are low." The audience gave an awkward laugh. Andy's smile tightened just a touch. He let it pass. "All right, we're starting spicy," Andy said. "I like it. Let's talk about life in the States. You've settled in California now. How different does it feel compared to, the palace, the tradition, all of that?" Harry shrugged, gaze drifting up at the monitor before coming back to Andy. "Well, in California, when people ask how you are, they don't expect you to lie about it," he said. "That's already an upgrade." "Okay," Andy replied, drawing out the word as the audience hummed, sensing the dig. "So, you don't miss the old life at all? The pageantry, the duty, the..." "Duty's a nice word," Harry cut in. "It makes control sound noble." The room quieted a little. Andy watched him, his host instincts kicking in, measuring how far to push. "But there must be something you miss?" Andy tried again. "I mean, the balcony moments, trooping the color, those iconic images we've all seen." Harry's lips curled slightly. Iconic for whom? He asked. For the press who made money off them, or for the people who like to project fairy tales onto a family that can barely function? A murmur rippled through the audience. Andy leaned back in his chair, considering. Some people would say they loved those images because they saw your mother there, Andy said gently. Because they saw Diana. Does that change it for you? For the first time, something flickered across Harry's face, annoyance, sharp and bright. There it is, he muttered. I was wondering how long it would take before we got to my mother. Andy's voice softened. Harry, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I think a lot of viewers feel they connected with her, and they think that entitles them to dissect my trauma on cable, Harry snapped, eyes narrowing. You know, it's interesting. People talk about empathy, but what they actually want is access. The air in the room cooled by several degrees. Andy held up a hand, slightly, not defensive, more in a calming gesture. I hear that, he said, but you've also chosen to talk about her in your book, in interviews. Isn't that your version of access? Harry let out a short, humorless laugh. When I speak about her, I'm telling my story, he said. When you bring her up on a neon set between commercial breaks, you're turning her into content. There was no laugh this time, only a thick humming silence. Andy took a breath, eyes briefly flicking toward the camera before returning to Harry. This is a show, Harry, he said quietly. Everything we talk about is content. That's how TV works. Exactly, Harry replied. That's why I don't owe it anything. Andy pressed his lips together, nodding slowly. He could feel the control room buzzing behind the cameras, the producers probably gesturing wildly. He pivoted. Let's shift gears, he said, voice brisk but still kind. How is life with Meghan these days? People have, a lot of opinions about her. How do you both handle that? Harry's expression hardened. People having opinions about my wife is not a personality trait, he said. But they act like it is. They sit on couches, drink wine, scroll headlines, and somehow decide they're experts on a woman they've never met. Andy tried a light smile. But you did put a lot of that story out there yourselves. Yes, Harry shot back. Our version, not the palace-approved, tabloid-massaged version. And guess which one people still prefer to believe? The audience shifted uncomfortably. A few people sipped their cocktails like shields. Andy looked down at his cards, skipping past 2 questions with a tiny flick of his thumb. All right, let's go a little lighter, he said. This is Bravo, after all. We have to talk about pop culture. You're in Montecito. Are you and Meghan reality TV people? Do you watch Real Housewives? Maybe one of the royal cousins showing up in a franchise? It was a deliberate attempt to soften the mood. The audience chuckled, relieved. Harry didn't. Reality TV is just the palace without titles, he said coolly. People performing dysfunction for an audience who pretend they're above it. The laughter died instantly. Andy blinked. Wow, so that's a no on Housewives? Harry's mouth twisted. I already lived in a house full of people backstabbing each other in designer clothes, he said. I don't need a subscription to see it again. Somewhere behind the cameras, someone swore under their breath. The tension was now a living thing, curling around the set, sitting between the 2 men like an unwelcome 4th guest. Andy inhaled, centering himself. He'd handled shouting matches between feuding housewives, explosive divorces, live walk-offs. But this was different. This wasn't campy rage or performative drama. This was a guest who seemed determined to belittle every question, every part of the environment he'd willingly entered. All right, Andy said, voice steady. Let me ask you this then. Do you ever worry that in trying to escape one system, royalty, the institution, everything you've described, you've stepped into another? Hollywood, streaming deals, book tours. Is there a part of you that wonders if you traded one stage for another? Harry leaned back, eyes narrowing just slightly. The difference, he said slowly, is that now I choose which stage I stand on. And you chose this one tonight, Andy replied, gesturing around them with a small, pointed smile. The clubhouse, the neon, the callers at home. Harry shrugged again, that same infuriatingly casual shrug. I chose it because I thought it might be refreshing, he said. I didn't realize we were going to dress tabloid questions up in glitter. A sharp exhale ran through the audience. Andy's fingers tightened around his question cards. "Oh, we're definitely sparkling tonight," he said lightly, but his eyes were cooler now. "Good thing we've got a few more rounds of questions." The band's little bumper sting played. The camera pulled out wide, catching the tension sealed inside the candy-colored set like a storm trapped in a snow globe. The screen faded to commercial, but in the studio, no one moved, no one relaxed. Andy Cohen darted a glance at his producers, who were already in his ear. "Keep going," they urged. "The ratings on this will be insane." He straightened his jacket, looked back at the man in the navy suit, and understood. This wasn't going to be like any episode he'd ever done. And the worst part? They were only getting started. The red AC lights glowed brighter as the show came back from commercial. Applause swelled on cue, but it felt thinner now, more nervous than excited. The cozy chaos of the clubhouse hadn't changed. The glittering Christmas tree still twinkled. The neon skyline still shimmered. Yet something in the room had shifted, as if every ornament and every bottle on the shelf were holding its breath. Andy Cohen sat straighter in his chair, the playful looseness he usually carried replaced by a quiet, determined focus. Across from him, Harry looked unmoved by the break, arms folded loosely, one eyebrow slightly raised, as if daring the next question to be worth his time. "Welcome back to Watch What Happens Live," Andy said smoothly. "We're here with Prince Harry, and things are getting honest in the clubhouse tonight." A cautious ripple of laughter passed through the audience. Andy glanced down at his cards. "Harry, let's talk about America for a moment. You've been here a few years now. You've talked about wanting privacy, about escaping the pressure. Do you feel like you've found that?" Harry's lips tightened into a thin smile. "You Americans have an interesting definition of privacy," he said. "You build gates the size of castles and still expect people not to look inside." "That's one way to put it," Andy replied. "I didn't come here to be adored," Harry continued, voice clipped. "I came here to be left alone. Those two things don't coexist very well in this country." Andy nodded slowly. "But you've signed huge media deals. You've released a memoir. You've done global interviews. Some people would argue that those choices invite attention rather than pushing it away." Harry leaned forward slightly, eyes sharpening. "People love saying that," he snapped. "It makes them feel smarter than they are, as if telling your story and wanting peace are somehow contradictory." "They don't have to be," Andy said carefully. "But when you step into the spotlight repeatedly, it does complicate the message." Harry scoffed. "You mean it complicates the narrative people prefer, the one where I'm either a villain or a fool? Reality tends to disappoint that kind of simplicity." The audience shifted again. Someone in the front row crossed their legs. Another took a long sip of their drink. Andy's tone remained professional but firmer now. "Let's talk about your relationship with the rest of your family. You've said some very strong things about your brother, your father, the institution itself. Do you believe those relationships are permanently broken?" Harry's jaw flexed. "They weren't exactly fragile to begin with." "And yet," Andy pressed, "many people watched you walk behind your mother's coffin beside your brother. They saw that bond. They believed in it." "They believed in an image," Harry replied, "not the reality behind it." "So there's no hope?" Andy asked. "No door left open?" Harry shrugged, a gesture so casual it felt almost cruel. "That depends on whether honesty is welcome in that house. History suggests it isn't." A soft murmur rolled through the crowd, some sympathetic, some uneasy. Andy took a breath. "You know, Harry, a lot of viewers feel conflicted. They empathize with your pain, but they also wonder if public accusations, especially against family, cross a line. How do you respond to that?" Harry's eyes flashed. "I respond by saying pain doesn't become less real just because it makes people uncomfortable." "Of course," Andy said, "but there's also the question of consequences." Harry tilted his head. "That sounds like a warning." "It's a reality of public life," Andy replied calmly. "Every word you say reverberates." "Funny," Harry said. "That concern never seemed to apply when the tabloids were writing whatever they liked about me. Or my wife." Andy paused for half a second, then nodded. "Let's talk about Meghan." An audible intake of breath swept through the audience. "You've defended her fiercely since the beginning," Andy said. "Some people see that as admirable. Others see it as fuel for division. Do you think things might have unfolded differently if you hadn't drawn such a hard line so publicly? Harry's voice sharpened instantly. So, now it's my fault that she was attacked? No, Andy said quickly. That's not what I said. It's what people always mean, Harry shot back. There's this endless appetite to analyze my marriage as if it's a political experiment, as if protecting my wife is somehow a strategic error. Andy leaned forward. I'm asking about strategy because you're now operating in a world where narrative equals power. You're no longer just reacting. You're shaping public discourse. Harry laughed, short and bitter. You give me far too much credit. The public discourse was written long before I ever opened my mouth. I'm just a character in it. That sounds like you're absolving yourself of responsibility, Andy said. Or recognizing the limits of it, Harry countered. Andy's eyes flicked briefly to the camera. He could feel the show skirting a line now, too tense for late night, too raw for comfort. But the audience was riveted. Let me ask you something personal then, Andy said slowly. Do you ever regret how publicly everything unfolded? The interviews, the book, the fallout? Do you ever think, I should have handled this differently? For the first time, Harry hesitated. It was subtle, just a fraction of a second. But it was there. Regret is a luxury for people whose voices are still intact, he said finally. Mine was being taken away piece by piece. I did what I had to do to keep it. And what about the people who feel hurt by what you said? Andy asked. Your father? Your brother? They made their choices, Harry snapped, just like I made mine. Andy studied him. You don't sound at peace with those choices. Harry's eyes narrowed. And you don't sound neutral anymore. A ripple went through the room. Andy straightened. I'm a host, Harry, he said. My job is to ask questions, even the uncomfortable ones. And my job, Harry replied coolly, is to decide which questions deserve answers. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another notch. Andy shifted gears again, sensing the need for balance. All right, let's talk about your mother. Not in the way you feared earlier, but in terms of legacy. What part of Diana do you most see in yourself today? Harry's expression hardened again. The part that couldn't survive that world. A hush fell. She wanted to protect her children from what she went through, Andy said gently. Do you think she would approve of the way you've chosen to fight back? Harry stared at him, eyes burning. You don't get to speculate about what my mother would think, he said quietly. Not here. Not ever. For the first time, Andy's voice lost a trace of its warmth. Harry, you brought her into this conversation many times before. And that doesn't give you ownership over her memory, Harry cut in sharply. The audience shifted again, the discomfort now palpable. The playful glow of the clubhouse felt almost mocking against the severity of the exchange. Andy set his question cards down on the small side table between them. You see, he said evenly, this is exactly what people struggle with. The line between boundary and deflection, between vulnerability and shutdown. And this, Harry replied, gesturing subtly around the garish set, is exactly what I struggle with, turning human lives into segments. Silence stretched between them. The band played a soft, uncertain bumper as Andy turned to the camera. We're going to take another quick break, he said. When we come back, we'll have viewer questions, if Prince Harry is up for that. Harry gave a slow, unreadable smile. We'll see. As the lights dimmed for commercial, a low buzz filled the studio. Producers whispered urgently into headsets. Audience members leaned toward one another, murmuring. Andy remained in his chair, jaw tight, staring at the floor for a brief moment before lifting his eyes back to Harry. For the first time that night, it was no longer about a difficult guest. It was about whether the show itself could still hold the line. The lights surged back to full brightness. The band hit the familiar upbeat return music, but this time it sounded forced, too cheerful for the tension coiled in the room. The applause sign lit up, blinked insistently. The audience clapped, not loudly, not warmly. It was the kind of applause people give when they're unsure whether they're supporting entertainment or watching a slow collision. Andy lifted his cue cards again, but his posture had changed. He wasn't leaning back anymore. He was sitting forward now, engaged, alert, guarded. Welcome back, he said quietly. We're taking viewer questions now. These come directly from the audience at home. Harry nodded once, barely. Andy read the first card. This is from Brooklyn. Prince Harry, do you believe you fully accepted that you are no longer a working royal, or do you still feel tied to that identity? Harry let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. That question alone tells me people still don't understand how deeply that role was carved into me. But have you accepted it? Andy asked. I've survived it, Harry replied. Acceptance suggests I had a choice. Andy tilted his head. Didn't you? Harry's eyes hardened. Do you honestly believe leaving was optional once certain lines were crossed? Andy held his gaze. I believe you made a decision. Whether forced or not, it was still a decision that reshaped millions of lives, not just yours. A rustle passed through the audience again. Andy moved on before the moment could stall. Next question, from Chicago. Why do you continue to speak about the royal family if you claim to want distance from them? Harry's jaw tightened immediately. Because silence never protected me. But speaking hasn't either, Andy replied. That depends on what you define as protection, Harry shot back. If you mean comfort, no. If you mean survival, absolutely. Andy's voice stayed level, but the edge was there now. Some people would argue that survival doesn't require public storytelling on this scale. Harry turned slightly in his chair, shoulders squaring. Some people have never had their entire life curated by an institution. Andy didn't back down. And some people have lost parents, siblings, privacy, and dignity without global media deals to help process it. The room went still. Harry's eyes flashed. So now we're comparing traumas? I'm questioning narrative framing, Andy said. There's a difference. Harry shook his head slowly. You're questioning credibility. I'm questioning consistency, Andy said, firmer now. Harry exhaled sharply through his nose. Those usually mean the same thing when someone is determined not to listen. Andy's jaw tightened. Another card. This one is from a military family in Texas, Andy read. You've spoken about your service with pride. Do you feel the controversies surrounding your private life have overshadowed that part of your identity? For a moment, something shifted in Harry's expression, something closer to wounded than defiant. Then the wall came back up. My service doesn't belong to the media cycle, he said. It belongs to the people I serve beside. Yet you've spoken about it publicly many times, Andy said. Yes, Harry snapped, to honor them, not to decorate controversy. Andy studied him for a beat. Do you feel your public behavior always reflects that intention? Harry stiffened. Are you questioning my integrity now? I'm questioning impact, Andy replied. Harry's voice rose for the first time. Impact is not something you control once the machine starts chewing. And yet you keep feeding it, Andy shot back. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. Even the band members froze. Harry leaned forward now, elbows near his knees. Let me be very clear, he said. If I stop speaking, the narrative doesn't stop. It just continues without me in it. At least now I'm not voiceless. Andy matched his forward lean. And what about the people who don't get to tell their side at all? Harry's eyes narrowed. They've been telling it for centuries. Through power, Andy replied. Not testimony. Silence. Andy drew a slow breath and moved to the next question, his tone cool but no longer light. From London. Do you still believe reconciliation with your family is possible? Harry didn't answer right away. The audience leaned forward as one. Reconciliation requires mutual accountability, he said finally. Right now, I see very little of that. And your accountability, Andy asked gently. Harry looked directly at him. I've torn my life open in ways most people wouldn't survive. If that isn't accountability, then your definition is impossible. Andy nodded once, but it was an agreement. One more card. This is from Diana's former charity volunteer, Andy read carefully. Do you worry that your public battles may distort your mother's legacy rather than protect it? The reaction was instant. Harry's face tightened. Anger, grief, and something sharper crossing it at once. You should not have read that question, he said. This is a live show, Andy replied. Viewers ask what they ask. And you choose what you amplify, Harry snapped. Andy straightened fully now. Harry, this entire program exists on the basis of questions people are not supposed to ask. That's the premise. You're exploiting her memory, Harry said coldly. Andy's voice dropped. And you've built a career around invoking it. The words landed like glass. For the first time, the audience did not react at all. No murmurs, no gasps. Just silence. Harry stared at Andy, stunned, not by the accusation itself, but by the fact that it had been said so plainly. "You've crossed a line," Harry said. Andy didn't flinch. "So have you," repeatedly, on air. The air between them felt charged, brittle, ready to break. Harry leaned back slowly, eyes burning. "You invited me here to ambush me." Andy shook his head. "I invited you here to talk. You turned every question into a battlefield." Harry laughed bitterly. "And yet, you kept pushing." "Because deflection is not dialogue," Andy said. The audience finally stirred, whispers, shifting bodies, visible discomfort. The playful neon and warm holiday lights now felt surreal against the confrontation unfolding under them. Andy placed the last of his cards down. "One final question," he said quietly. Harry said nothing. Andy looked him directly in the eye. "Do you want to be understood, or do you want to keep fighting ghosts?" For the first time all night, Harry had no immediate retort. The pause stretched. The band did not play. The audience did not breathe. Harry's lips parted slightly. And then, the commercial brake lights flickered on again. But this time, the tension did not dim with them. It intensified. Because now, both men understood the same thing. The next few minutes would decide how this night ended. The red on-air lights snapped back to life. Andy and Harry sat in silence for 2 full seconds. No eternity in live television. The audience held its breath. The Christmas lights behind them suddenly felt ironic, almost mocking. Andy broke the silence first. "Before the break," he said steadily, "I asked whether you want to be understood, or whether you want to keep fighting ghosts." Harry's jaw tightened. He didn't look at Andy. He looked past him, toward the audience, toward the cameras, toward the millions watching. "People like you," he said slowly, "always think you're entitled to answers. You think a platform gives you ownership over my life." Andy's voice remained calm. "No, a platform gives space for questions. Ownership comes from how you choose to answer them." Harry let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Then maybe you should choose better questions." Andy's eyes hardened for the first time that night. "And maybe you should choose better responses." The audience shifted. Several people murmured quietly now. Harry leaned forward, his tone finally cutting. "This entire show thrives on spectacle, on provocation. Don't pretend this is about truth." Andy set his cards down deliberately. "Harry," he said firmly, "you agreed to this conversation. You've insulted the process, deflected every serious question, and turned personal accountability into performance. I've been patient. I've been respectful. But this," he gestured subtly between them, "is no longer a conversation." Harry scoffed. "So now you're silencing me." Andy shook his head slowly. "No, I'm ending a situation that has stopped being productive." He turned slightly toward the audience, then back to Harry. "This show is called Watch What Happens Live. What happened tonight is that one guest refused to engage in good faith." Harry stood abruptly. "You're making a mistake," he said. Andy stood as well, slowly, decisively. "The mistake," he replied, "was letting this continue after it stopped being about dialogue." The room was completely silent now. "Prince Harry," Andy said clearly, calmly, "this interview is over. I'm asking you to leave the set." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Harry stared at him in disbelief. "You're kicking me out?" Andy met his eyes without hesitation. "Yes, I am." For a heartbeat, it looked as if Harry might explode. Instead, he gave a tight, bitter smile. "Then congratulations," he said. "You finally got your headline." He turned, walked past the chairs, past the glowing decorations, past the stunned band, straight off the set. The camera stayed on Andy. He took a breath, composed himself, and faced the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said quietly, "we'll be right back." The music faded in, but the damage and the moment were already locked into television history. What started as a celebrity appearance ended as one of the most tense walk-offs ever seen on late-night television. Do you think Andy was right to end the interview, or did things go too far? If you enjoyed this dramatic story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more explosive confrontations like this.